everyone, this is Kelly from The Truth in Story, and I am getting ready to do a class on Ohms, which is going to be starting August 25th. And in order to kind of prep students and some questions and things about decks, I decided I would do a quick intro into the Ogham decks that I have and or books, and which I recommend, and a couple quick ideas for making your own sets of Ohms. I have reviews for most of these decks. I think this might be the only one that I don't, and I'll try to get that up this week. And I know I have a video, I think, on how I made my smaller set of Ohms, which I will show you in a minute once I go through all this. So I'm going to try to keep this fairly concise and just kind of go quickly through the decks, why I would recommend one, and the maybe problems or strengths of the different decks. So that's what I'm going to do. One of the things that I wanted to really point out was that some of the reasons that I might not use a particular deck aren't necessarily going to be because of the artwork or anything like that, but the fact that Ohms are something that are, it's very all over the place in terms of meaning. So while most of the things that we see relate Ohms to trees, which is how I read them, even though I understand that historically that was something that was probably layered on. A lot of them do have direct tree linkages, but not all of them do. Some of the other ones were added in later to make this complete tree alphabet. So, you know, as in all things that have been around as long as something like Celtic Ohms, you are going to have a mix of history with mythology and mysticism and all of that kind of thing. And there is no world in which we are ever going to know exactly how, in my opinion, how a druid perhaps in 100 AD or 300 AD used Ohms in any way outside of sort of the way that we see them as markers and things on stones, because all that we have left are the stones and things that survived in that fashion. So there is never going to be a definitive answer on how some of these systems that are so old and that were based in wood or oral traditions or hand signals or paper or whatever ephemeral or just handed down through oral traditions. Part of what restoration or revival of older religions and older systems, part of the things that we have to accept with those types of things is that we are creating really a new system based off of old, as much information as we might have, and then creating a modern system of that. It doesn't necessarily going to reflect exactly what it was originally, and I'm okay with that, but I do like to do due diligence in terms of teaching, or in terms of learning myself, and then of course in terms of teaching. So you're going to have however many books you might have on Ohms, and you're going to have oftentimes vastly different. This is one version. I have my finished one over here of my going through sources and kind of comparing key information. And while there are a couple, like 2 or 3 out of 25 that have, you know, across the board really similar meanings, most of the time they are very different meanings, very wildly different meanings. And even within, if the people who associate trees to the certain Ohms, those can be various different ones for different systems and different ways of associating them and so on. So it is very much one of those things that is a mixed bag in terms of what you're going to associate meanings, trees, all kinds of things onto it. And so that is going to change dramatically book to book to book. And so I would never look at any resource that you have on a system such as Ohms, probably the same with runes. A lot of these older systems, even things such as geomancy, because it's one perspective, and it doesn't mean that you can't get anything out of the books, because you can, as long as you keep it in the back of your head that this is one person's lens of Ohms. And so you're kind of, and then you're going to have to come up with and form either, well, two things. You're either going to have to just take one and say, you know what, Sherilyn Hidalgo's guidebook on Ohms in her deck, that's what I'm going with. I'm going to take those associations and I'm going to run with it. Bam. Right? And just stick with that. So that's one way of doing it. The other way is to understand that this is a lens. There are multiple lenses at work here, and to figure out what works for you. And what that might look like might be very different than what mine looks like, right? Because I'm a researcher, and this is something that I've been reading and kind of playing with the histories and things since my early 20s. And so for me, if you look at this sheet, and I'm not going through this, this is something I'm using for class. My point is that if you, I don't think you know if you can see in this, but this is almost split in half. This is shaded gray, first half. This half is not. These are the different decks that I have here, plus a book that I have. And so this is what one side of this is. The other side has to do with the kennings. These are little bits of poetry that we have. There are 3 sets of the kennings and one translation of one of the kennings that we have. And so I sort of backed myself up to those kennings versus what have now been layered on and put on, and some things through some, like the Golden Bough book, which was, you know, not really based on history. It was much more of a mystical type of book, and there's nothing wrong with that, but it's certainly not something that you would take as historical evidence. And so I say, okay, well, go back to where, for me personally, go back to what we know of in terms, as far as back as we can, in terms of what we know of these things were translated as, and start there, and then start to build my meanings between. I do like to keep the trees, even though I know that these all don't mean tree names. There are some that mean iron, and there's another that means fear, and there's one that means like a cry out, or a moan or a groan. So I know historically that all of the Ohms do not stand historically for trees. A lot of them do, but not all of them do. And then which ones go with which can be really dicey for some of them. So I understand that, and understanding that, I still choose to work through the tree energy, but using this base of what the original kennings were. So that's kind of how I've sort of worked my way back to the original kennings, and then come up with my own keywords. I can still take these other things into account, but I'm kind of working my way back that way. Yours might look very different than that, and so that's okay, as long as we kind of each person figures out what works for them in these types of systems. And then if you apply these things consistently, whether it was exactly what a druidess did in 500 AD in the middle of the forest, isn't, to my opinion, so relevant, right? As long as you're going in with that intention for a message, and you've got set understandings of what these mean to you, you're going to get messages out of that, and it's going to work just fine for you. It's your version of this beautiful system. So that was way longer than I intended to have that conversation. But I think around things such as runes and Ohms and certain types of things, I think it's so important to understand that we are reviving or reclaiming, or there's lots of terms for sort of that revivalist of old systems or old religions, of that kinds of things, and in the process of doing that, we do have to accept that we do the best that we can, and we be consistent and respect the tradition, but that there will be deviations. There will be a modernization just by the very nature of how little surviving information there are of these really old systems. So That being said, these are the decks that I have. Now, the first deck that I want to just quickly talk about, and I have links, I will link to all of the decks I've done reviews of. I believe, again, this is the only one I haven't, but I'll check. This was my very first deck. Now, if you've watched any of my other videos on Ohms, I had my early 20s when I was coding on some mushes and muds, which were text-based multi-user shared hallucinations. So think World of Warcraft, but all done through text. And there was a lot, well, in the mushes there was a lot more role play going on, where muds were much more like World of Warcraft, where you're just killing orcs and goblins and things. So early 20s, I coded a Ogham deck and a rune deck, I believe. And I don't know, to be honest, what was the first text that I came across about Ohms, because this was not when I had this deck. This was not when I was really doing much of any divination, except for maybe playing card divination. And I was fascinated with all things Celtic. I've always read Celtic mythology. So somewhere, right, somewhere in my book research, because this was before the web was the web, I stumbled on runes and Ohms. And I know I had at least the base meaning, and then, or the base name, and then the meaning of it, because you could draw them out of this virtual box and get a meaning out of it. So I have no clue what text that was, but I do remember that in a short span, about 15 years ago or so, I got my first tarot deck, which was the Llewellyn Tarot, based on Welsh mythology. And then this deck, which is the Celtic Tree Oracle by Liz and Colin Murray. I think I stumbled on this at Barnes & Noble's. Again, this was before you could purchase things. There was no web. Well, I don't know when I got this, if there was, but I know I stumbled on this in person. I want to say it was at Barnes & Noble's before there were a lot of different decks, but I was so excited to see this because I knew what Ohms were, and oh my goodness, here is a deck of Ohms, and I purchased this. And then a friend of mine had given me Brian Froud's Heart of Fairy Oracle. Those are my 3 decks for like 9.5 years that I used. And I used this deck probably as much as, if maybe not more, than my tarot deck. It was probably 50-50, but I used this deck a lot. And I absolutely love it. It's beautiful. The trees are gorgeous. The Ohms are nice and prominent. You can see them. It has the Old Irish, and it has the English name of the tree, and they're just beautiful. I mean, it looks very Celtic, not worky, and it's a gorgeous deck. It's held up really well. Now, I will say I haven't really rifle shuffled these because they're really heavy, thick cardstock, so they don't bend really well. And so I used to sit outside and do these on a blanket, and most of the time I just kind of shuffled them in a pile and pulled 3 out. So they did not get the heavy rifle shuffling like I do now, and I don't eat anymore with these either, because again, it's just too hard to. So they're generally either overhand shuffled or spread about and grabbed 3, but still, these have held up really well. This is a well held up deck. You can still purchase this. This is still one of my favorite, one of 2 favorites. I'll show you the next favorite, and I would say it's gorgeous. The book is pretty good, but it's not my favorite in terms of if you're a new person to if you're new to reading Ohms. The setup, and they used to have it came with a pad of paper to do all these readings. This is a 15 card Ogham reading. It really was complicated to do, and it took a while, and I think this is the only reading it talks about to do, and it comes with a pad of paper to do it. That's all. I did that a lot. I think I eventually went down to just doing a 5 with the 4 elements and kind of combined it with the directions. But for a new beginner to this, I think that this isn't the best guidebook. I actually much prefer this guidebook. But I would say if you this is high on my list. If you only buy one and you're new, I would say probably this one, which I'm going to talk about next. If you are really excited about Ohms, I would say these two. So let me put that one aside. This is the Celtic Tree Oracle, same name, but this one's by Charlene Hidalgo. You can see on the back a little bit. Let's see, I don't have the box right here. The deck actually has this border and then another border around that. So they are Blue Angel Oracle size. I like my Ohms decks to be obviously smaller. Since I mostly always use this, I really didn't want a full Oracle size. And so I trimmed this all the way down, which made it just a little bit skinnier, but a little bit taller. It's a nice size. I think these are stunning. Look at the heather. They are just beautiful. The only complaint that I have about this one is that I do wish, this is a deck of Ohms, right? So at least these Ohms are really, the actual fit is prominent. This is, look how small that is compared to that. So I do wish that this had been larger with the actual figure of the Ogham. That's my only complaint about this. But it's stunning. It's really beautiful. I probably truthfully use this the most. I don't really use decks too much anymore because I use these, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But when I do, this is a deck that I use because right now it's just so gorgeous. This book, I feel like, again, none of the books are perfect because, again, it's just one person's interpretation. This does have reversed meanings on it. I don't even know what this does. I don't use reversals with tarot, and I don't use reversals with Ohms, you know, because of the way Ohms are, although obviously you're going to see that it's upside down because they usually have insignia, but it would just make another Ogham for quite a few of them. So, and as with all things that I've said, even about tarot or anything else, I think you should be, whatever system you're using, you should be taking in aspects of light and shadow for all of the, whenever they come up. I don't think this does reversals, but this deck does, and I don't use reversals, but many tarot deck books have it and I don't use it, so that's okay. So again, not perfect, but I think that this is a little bit easier to jump into for somebody completely new to Ogham. Plus, again, it's just gorgeous. These are both gorgeous for completely different aesthetics, right? I don't think one is more beautiful than the other. This is just beautiful, vibrant. I love that it gives us a real close-up of like leaves or fruit if it bears fruit. I just think this is gorgeous. The other thing that I will say is that these two decks, and these are the reasons I personally use these two the most. There are 20 traditional Ohms in groups of 5. There is a 5th group of 5 that is very wildly different depending on who's talking about them. A lot of people don't even use them because they are only show up in manuscripts. They don't show up in any actual carvings or anything of that nature. So they're much more iffier. There's some people who don't use them at all. There are other people who interpret them in various different ways. So they are not the same across the board at all. But these two decks use the same correspondences to those extra 5 forfida, I guess you would call them. It's the extra 5, and these use the same one, so that if you kind of get to know the meaning through these decks, they both work together because it's the same interpretation of those in these two decks. So that makes it a nice set in that way. Some decks won't even have the extras, and then others will just have with different meanings on them. So those are my two favorites. The Green Man Oracle is amazing. I do love John Matthews' work, and he has, so the book itself is fantastic to have. I do love his, some of his reading, because this is a very often how I read, is with sort of the tree aspect there, so I like that. So this is really lovely, and this is the artwork of Will Worthington. Now this deck here, the Green Man Tree Oracle, is out of print. However, it is coming back. They are bringing it back, I think this year, but I'm not positive. I'm really hoping that they fix one of my big problems with this, is that I cannot, like right now I don't have my glasses on, I cannot read this. So for example, I can read this and see this without my glasses. With this, I can't. It's a combination of how small the Ogham is. Even, you know, you think that's small, right? But this is even small, way smaller still. And the very thin font on top of the dark red, it just does something to my eyes, and I really can't read it. So I not only can't read it well, I can't see what the Ogham is. And so this is not a working deck for me. It does also have some different associations with the extra 5. You can always just pull those 5, you know, out of your deck and just use the standard 20, and that kind of takes care of that problem. I'm hoping when this new deck comes out, that this will be much better, and that the Ogham will be much more prominent. This is an Ogham deck, and I think you should be able to see the Ogham fids. So but other than that, it's Will Worthington's art, which I love. So I'm really happy to have this, because I have all of Will Worthington's decks, but it is not a deck that I actually use, but I do love the resource of the book. We're getting there. I need to speed it up. This is a deck by Mickey Muller. What I love about this is I love a couple things. I think that some people have a little bit of a stress over a deck that simply has a tree and a leaf and a berry on it, right? Or just a branch with some leaves on it. That's got the ocean, which is lovely. But mostly it's a tree and a branch and a fruit, if it has that. So there are some people who say, okay, that doesn't really tell you anything unless you know about all those trees. It doesn't tell you anything. And then the symbol itself, it doesn't tell you anything. So it's kind of like reading pips, in the fact that you do need to do the work to learn learn the meanings of the Ohms. But much also like pip cards, decks like this and this that don't have any meanings on them, leave it open, because there are so many different ways to read these cards, or these figures. It leaves this open for anybody to pick up and put their own understanding of them on there and be able to use the cards. So this is much like a pip deck, but to some people they're like, oh, you know, that just doesn't mean anything to me. I don't know what to do with that. So Mickey Muller's deck does two things. It has the 2 keywords, and I do quite like kind of the keywords that are on here, even though these are not exactly how I see all of the Ohms. They're close, and you can certainly see how she gets there. So it's not that they're wrong, it's just, again, different interpretations, right? But she also, much like a scenic minors in a tarot deck, she had the images actually relate to the energy. So if we have obstacle or tension here, and here we've got a pack of wolves, right? Well, yeah, that's an obstacle, right? So, and the other thing is that in the kennings, which are the kind of poem lines about them, it's about a pack of dogs or a pack of wolves, and you can see those running by. So it actually has a lot of the understanding of what these might read by looking at the images themselves, which is really lovely to have. So I think this is fantastic, again, for people who, you know, they just want a little bit more to work with. One of the things I like about the deck is that, does this have the kennings in it? She writes a divining chart. She does give you the pronunciation, which is very helpful. But one of the things I do like is she gives some of the lore of the plant, but then she also does a field guide, so more of that scientific information about the plant. That can also help you to sort of come to sort of your meanings of things as well, or to kind of start to dig in a little bit. So I do think this is a great guidebook, and I'm really happy to have that resource. I do use this deck mostly for setting intentions, so I might just want to really quickly say, calling on, the focus of oneness, or I might kind of just shift through here really quickly and say I'm needing clarity and putting the card out for clarity. So I often use this for laying out for setting intentions. So I do use this deck. I just don't generally use it for divination because I use these as we're going to talk about. So I think that this is a beautiful deck, and it has the potential benefit of having the image and the keywords, but it's also a potential con if that isn't how you end up seeing that particular Ogham, and then it's kind of like me with the 10 of Swords and 3 of Swords and a Rider-Waite-Smith deck, and having to work my way around it when I'm talking about my reading. So it's, that's a plus and a minus. Okay, we talked about this. I know I'm talking too much, but this is a newer deck. I have not done a review of it. You can get it on Etsy. It's called the Roots deck here. Roots, Insights from the Green. It is a self-published deck. It has, one of the things I really like about it is that it kind of uses the tree to make the Ogham. So the Ogham is the entire card. So here we have the Ogham for Holly, and it has that full Ogham right out of the branches, right? So that's really beautiful. So I like that. Again, one of the downsides is it does have keywords on it. And so that isn't always, I also wish that, because sometimes it's questionable if you're just kind of look at these, there's a couple of them that I had to stop and think, well, what's that supposed to be? Some of them it's obvious because that that's ivy, but it would have been nice, I think, maybe to have the actual name perhaps. But anyways, I like the imagery of this, but it does have keywords. So obviously if the keyword doesn't work, I haven't gone through this one by one yet to see how it lines up with the way that I see them, but I do like the imagery. You can buy the deck separately or with the book. The book itself is self-published, so there's a little bit of distortion. Like, I think because she was taking a smaller image and trying to stretch it into this big book, it it kind of pixelates and distorts the image. So some of the imagery is a little bit pixely on it, but it does give you a lot of information. Again, I will do a walkthrough of this because she does give you the kennings. I think most of these are the kennings that she gives. She gives her particular message. She gives botanical names. She gives it in Scots Gaelic, Irish Gaelic, and Welsh. She gives a lot of backstory into the tree and or the folklore around things. She also, for each one of the cards, does give you a very thorough bibliography as to where she found those particular stories about each of those things. So so you can see how because it's blown up, it's a little pixely. I don't know if that's going to show up in the video or not, but so it's not a cheap book, so it was kind of a little bit disappointing to see that pixelation come up here after purchasing it. But you do get a giant image of it, which is nice, and there is a lot of information in the book itself. So Again, I will try this. This is already Thursday, I think. So I will try in the next few days to get a walkthrough of this deck up for people who are curious about it. I've had it for quite a while now. I just haven't gotten around to doing a walkthrough of it. So that's another one. I think that's all my decks. So those are the decks that I have and or even know about. I don't really know of any other decks off the top of my head. Of course, we can say that nobody, certainly in the ancient times, was using decks of cards to use and or read with Ohms. I'm in the process of painting my own deck for Ohms. I kind of got stuck, but as many things. But I'm restarting it up again. This is my favorite right now, the birch. But this has been really, for me, it's been really, because I've worked with Ohms for so long, and so just kind of sitting down and thinking about each one of the trees and looking up actual image of the trees has been really lovely experience to kind of focus work on each one, which has been quite enjoyable. But my point being is that this is my pride and joy. I have always wanted a set of these, but they can be quite expensive. However, Bella had sent me this and had found, and I will put a link to his Etsy shop. He does not always have them up, but they're not there, and then he'll put some sets up. I mean, it probably takes time, obviously, to harvest the different trees, and from everything I understand, he has great methods and sustainable methods of harvesting and all of this kind of thing. And so, there's not mass produced. You're not going to have tons of these, but they're really quite affordable, surprisingly affordable, which is wonderful. So I will put a link to his sometimes his shop is closed. It will be on vacation. It will come back. Sometimes he has them in stock. Sometimes he doesn't, but I'll at least put a link there. Because you can find sets of these where each one of these Ohms is taken from the tree that it is actually associated with. Now again, you're going to have variations because there are Ohms that are, say, one of them is like at least one of them has 3 different potentials. One could be gorse, firs. Firs and gorse are kind of the same plant, but can also be broom. I think even rowan can sometimes be seen as broom. So there are, in all of these sets, there's going to be differing. There may be some differences, but that doesn't bother me. Even if I particularly see one as gorse and it's in this set as broom, it's okay. I just use the Ogham as it is because it's still in with one of those tree plant energies. And this is, this is my baby. I mean, it's literally been since my early 20s that the idea of having something like this was certainly written about, but I would have had no idea back then where to have even found something like this and not been able to get all the trees. So this really was like a dream come true. And of course, this is primarily how I do read with Ohms now that I have this. But while these can be quite expensive, there's different sets and things. You can search for them and find different sets, especially on Etsy. There's quite a few different sets in different price ranges. Again, this was cheaper, I think, than probably some of my decks, or at least around the same price as some of my decks, of my Ogham decks. But before that, for quite a while, I had made a little set, and I think I might have a video on this, but I thought I'd go over that. I really like this set, actually. And so I went to the craft store and got it was a bag of these. I mean, so cheap. Maybe it was $2 for a huge bag of all different sizes. And then I just took out the sizes, the same size for 25 of them. And so you can see I have the name sort of the English, what the English name would be. This would be Grove or Coad. I have the Ogham actually on here, and then I have the dots for whether it's a chieftain, shrub, or peasant. And then I just got a stamp at the store that was had these little leaves on it. I think it was much longer, and I just used the top part. So on the backs, I just stamped them all the same, like it's the back of a card. And I literally wrote on these with marker. I'm pretty sure, it's been a while since I did it, but I'm pretty sure I just wrote on it with a Sharpie marker. I love these. I think they're really pretty. They're really usable. You know, I just can get in, I just usually keep them in the bag, grab 3 out, because I often do ohms as 3. Casting ohms, I prefer to do with these because you can get where they crisscross over and things. But yeah, you can just grab your 3 things out, lay them out. I really like these. I have these are beautiful. These are something that I would continue to use even though I have that. If I wanted to for some reason, or again to lay them out for setting intentions if I'm doing different things. I really like this set, and it was so cheap and fast to be able to make. So I really recommend, you know, if you can't find exactly these types of things that I'm showing you, you know, get creative. Go to your craft store. In America, you're talking about Joann Fabrics, Michaels, Hobby Lobby, AC Moore. Those are the main ones that I can kind of crafty kinds of things. But I know in other countries, you know, there are places you can get crafty things, often in kids sections, right? For kid supplies to be making crafts with children, you can find different things, such as these you can find, I feel like, just about everywhere. Now, one of the things that I liked about these is that they're actually short. A lot of times these tongue depressor style sticks are much longer. And so I was excited to find this set here. This has 50 of them in it, which would make 2 sets of ohms. And I don't remember. It was like 2 something. I'm sure I used a coupon. So this is a great size. You can see this is actually very close to the same size as my actual ohms, which is so nice. And you can take and, I think I did put a thin coating of like something on here like wood. I use it on guitars. I don't remember what it's called. It's almost like a mineral oil for wood. So you could even put something on there, but it's not necessary. But you could if you wanted to make these, stain these a different color, right? But you can do the same thing here. You can put, say, the insignia, and you could actually put it on both sides, the same thing. So you can put, that just tells you which side is up and which side is down, right? I also have the number if it's associated with the month or the moons, the moon cycles. And you can make this more elongated. You can do whatever you want, right? And so you could write Gort up here. Again, I'm not trying to do anything fancy here. I'm just trying to give you an idea. Ivy, you could even put the 3 dots here for the chieftain, so you have your information. You could even write on the back of it then, if you wanted to, like growth. That's, you know, one of the keywords that you could use for Gort. And so you would then, you know, and again, you can use fancier things and, you know, do what you want. But in terms of learning and studying, bam, there you go. You could make a set of these really cheap. If you have a wood burner, the wood burning pens, you can, same thing, get pieces of wood and burn them and make some beautiful things. So there's nothing saying that you need to purchase a deck to work with ohms. There's nothing that says that you have to purchase, you know, a beautiful deck where a set where each one is in the actual tree, even though it's absolutely the most amazing thing on the planet. It is very easy to start with, and that way you can see, do I even like working with ohms? I don't even know if I like working with ohms. So this is a very cheap way. You can also go out and harvest your own wood. It doesn't have to each one be its own tree, right? Some beautiful tree. Maybe you had a tree that lost a large branch, or you have woods nearby that you can just walk through and gather up fallen branches, trying to get similar size. It helps if they're at least somewhat the same size. There is great variation in these, but they are, not so badly so that it's hard to work with. But you could just find similar size branches, cut them, peel off a little bit, wood burn your thing on here, and have a beautiful set of Ogham that doesn't have to be all the different branches, right? There's just so many different ways in which you can make your own set of staves, or runes if you're into runes. Like, this works for other things as well. Obviously, we're talking about Ohms here. And so, yeah. So I just wanted to come on, show you the decks that I had, show you a couple, ideas to get your brain thinking about ways you could even get rocks and paint on there, and then varnish them. You can go get those vase filler rocks from the craft store and use a paint marker, write them on and seal it. Like, there's so many different ways to very cheaply make yourself a set of Ogham staves or stones or whatever it is that you want to use, so that you can work with those. I worked with these for quite a long time, well, since I made them, and I really enjoyed them, and I still enjoy them, and they were so cheap, both in money and time to put together. So don't let something like, oh, that's because there are beautiful, like $100, $125 sets of these that are stunning, and that is not saying that they aren't worth that, but if that's just simply out of your price range, don't let that stop you from being able to work with a beautiful system. So I'm going to stop rambling. I think I have kind of covered all of the bases for people who are getting ready to take my class, but I thought it was also just going to be helpful for anybody who's just interested in picking up a book on Ohms and already has a book on Ohms and just kind of wants to start working with it. Now, the last thing I want to talk about quickly are books. As you have seen, many of the books that I have are guidebooks that came with the decks. And those are wonderful resources to use. And so much of my books came from that source, and or web pages and things of that nature. I do have Ogham, The Celtic Oracles of the Tree by Paul Riss-Mountfort that Bella had also sent me. I love this author's book on runes. And I do like this book as well, even though, again, I might not have, 100% go for all of it. What I love is that there is, so for example here, for birch, the birch tree here, we have the status of the tree, we have the names, we have how to pronounce it, we have the word Ogham, so these are the kennings that are used. We have a visualization that you might use in terms of what it might look like. We have a basic meaning here. We have keywords with reversed. He uses reversals, I believe. I don't use reversals with Ohms. It has the natural characteristics of birch. It also has stories from out of myths, folklore, and magic. So there is quite a bit on each that I think is quite relevant. Again, I think that you should take every source with a grain of salt, understand where it may be coming from, and figure out. But for me personally, it's great to have the kennings right there, the pronunciations right there. It's great to have some of the natural characteristics, some of the main stories that have shown up regarding that particular tree. But I will say that all of his, I believe, are associated and focused on the tree energy that is there. Now, so this is focused on one viewpoint of the Ohms as a tree alphabet, right, that has always been associated, or for the most part been associated with trees, even though we do know that further back that may or may not have been so. What I love, the other book that I really love and would, at this point would recommend, would be the Ogham. This one, I think both of these are spelled O-G-A-M. You can see the difference. There are various spellings for it. You often see O-G-H-A-M. You will also see pronunciations such as Ohm, or Ogham. Those are the most popularly accepted way to pronounce them correctly. Of course, some people say Ogham because they put that hard G in there. But this is called Ogham, Weaving Word Wisdom, and it's by Aaron Rowan Laurie. Now, this is obviously the Kindle version, but there is a paperback version. But what I love about this, and let me see if I can quickly, I wanted to show you, at least kind of show you the cover here. What I really appreciate about this book is that she talks a lot about understanding revival and reclaiming old systems and old religions, revising or reviving, I should say, old systems, that I think puts a lot of common sense onto what's happening when we're doing that. So I really appreciate that. And she doesn't base hers on the trees, although she does insert, when there are trees associated with it, she does put that in there. That's something I really appreciate, because you get both. So she has, she has the name, obviously, the letter it's associated with, the word actually means, which isn't always a tree name. So, but in this case, it is birch. Her personal keyword, kind of condensing it to a keyword. She has the kennings from all three of the sources that we have. She puts the color, the tree, and a bird. I believe sometimes the birds are things we found in kennings. Sometimes I think she's had to kind of pick one to put in there. She also puts a musical note, and she also puts a planet. Now, she talks about how the astrology that's in this book are things that she has put herself. This is her own system of using things. So you, again, can take that. She's very clear in this book when it is traditional sources versus her own sources, and I really appreciate that. So she talks about if there are trees, if there are multiple trees, she brings in the fact that there are multiple trees. She does talk about where the actual word might come from. She also talks about the traditions of the different trees, if it's related to the tree. She talks about different tales, how things are used magically, her modern planet, that's how she associates what planet she associates it to it. And then she talks about how you might see that in divination. She also talks about 3 levels of reading. One is a chthonic, which is a more physical thing, I believe, or a deeper depth. I haven't looked at that too strongly yet, but she reads it in 3 ways. And then the ocean current, which is more creative and emotional. And then how you would read that in a celestial context. So it's like 3 layers, 3 levels of how you might read that. A question, if this comes up, what would this question, this Ogham might have for you. And then some keywords of concepts that would be linked into that particular Ogham. So a lot of information here, very clear over what's traditional versus what she's added in, or what she brings to the conversation. So this is one that I really like, because it focuses on the kennings, and it focuses on what that actual word might have meant, even if it doesn't relate to a tree. Like there are ones that, again, just mean iron. So then what does that mean in terms of that meaning of the word, along with the trees that are traditionally associated? So I really, I think this is a great resource. This book is a great resource. So I just wanted to quickly show those 2 books. Just to sort of wrap up sort of resources regarding Ohms. But as with all things, right, whether this is tarot or Lenormand, you know, the key is starting to get these things onto the table and doing your readings, because in the end, right, that's what's going to matter, is casting and reading and getting comfortable with what these mean when they come up to you. So I hope that you have enjoyed this, and I look forward to seeing you guys all in the next video.